Welcome back to Never Iron Anything, the comics review podcast. This week I'm joined for another Artist Roundtable episode with two fantastic comic creators I'm proud to call friends and collaborators. Let's hear some applause in the cheap seats, and you lot up there in the balcony can shake and rattle your jewellery. It's Cliff Cumber and Ian Ashcroft. Hello, gents.
Hello, Tony.
Hello, Tony.
Up there, a little bit of jewellery.
Well, is that John Lennon? I forget who said that.
Yeah, it's the Beatles.
Yeah,
Wasn't it John Lennon doing an impression of Jimmy Savile?
Second
Not to be controversial.
Second time Savile's come up on this podcast. There you go. Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, last week he got mentioned. I'm not sure if Pete thought we were hijacking it and putting it to him, but yeah, it had to be talked about. And I'm sorry for mentioning the Beatles without being a Scouser, Ian.
It's all right. I'm from the Wirral, so I'm not allowed to call myself a Scouser.
Although you do support the Reds, don't you?
Yeah, I do, but I don't want to talk about it. Let's move on.
I'd like to talk about it. Can we talk about it? Let's talk about it.
No, let's not.
Didn't they just get crushed by Madrid or something?
Yeah, they did. And you only know that because you saw it on the WhatsApp message.
That's true. I know nothing else. That's the single fact I know.
I think all we got from Ian was sorry, I haven't been chatty this evening. I feel a bit depressed.
Miserable.
Good.
I was very depressed. It was 5-2. It was horrible.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, they got battered. And they scored 2 goals first. No one cares about this. Let's just move on.
Well, it's not too good. I support Millwall, so I'm always perennially depressed.
Yeah.
Good. So this week we're back to the Artist Roundtable, and we have chosen an artist who sadly passed away recently. Did you want to, Cliff? Let's have you. Did you want to say who we're going to talk about?
Yep. So one of the artists we decided to talk about was the late, much missed, but legendary Kevin O'Neill.
Yeah.
Just a, well, we're going to talk about him and all of his qualities, but oh my God, what an artist, you know?
Yeah,
what a
definitely.
Guy.
And a real loss. And he was only 69. You know,
Yes.
These days that's young, isn't it? You know.
Way too young, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go to you, Ian, then. Let's do the first question we always ask. What was your first exposure to Kev O'Neill?
Nemesis, which is something that I think Cliff's going to talk about. But
yeah,
the first thing I came across, I think I've talked about my cousin having his big stack of 2000 ADs that I'd go through. And when I started diving into comics, it was Pat Mills's work that I came across really early on because of Simon Bisley. Like when we talked about Slaying the Horned God in previous episodes, and then you obviously I really like Pat's writing, and Nemesis came along, and I really love the artwork in Nemesis. I just think it's fantastic. And then to be honest, I'm going to talk about martial law, and that was after listening to the ACP and Dan talking about it, and then I think you had Pat on talking about it, and that's how I came across that.
Yeah.
And that would be the main thing from Kevin O'Neill, that Nemesis, and then martial law. But
yeah,
just loads of the covers. There's the one Talk Armada where it's like the jaws all opening out from the famous cover of 2000 AD, like so iconic, and just being aware of it. And actually, when he passed away, one of my friends, he's a tattooist down south in Brighton, he was sort of lamenting the loss, and he was showing some of the examples of work that really got it. Kevin O'Neill's his big artist, and when you look at the tattoos and stuff he does, you can really see that influence in his work. And
yeah,
I'm just thinking, that he is such an incredible, just ideas machine, and then the way he's drawing all these different sort of characters is so unique. I just look at his work and I think, he's the reason we don't need to worry about AI art at all.
That's a good point. If there was ever an example,
you just you don't need to worry about it as long as there's artists out there who are coming up with original. I mean, he's learning. He's just giving everyone a completely new perspective on everything. And
good point, man.
Just the talent.
I mean, that is something we're going to talk about in a minute. Is the artist and the art and how much speaks through it. But what about you, Cliff? Where did you first come across him, dude?
So Yeah, my first visceral memory of Kevin O'Neill was Nemesis, just as it was with with Tara. Oh, sorry, I mean Ian. Sorry, his name's Tara. Um, and yeah, so it was definitely that groundbreaking work. I just a bit of context, collected 2000 AD from the very first prog when I
I
was
didn't know you were a prog
6
one.
or 7 years old.
Okay.
Yep. I remember getting the spinner disc or whatever it was off of the first one.
Yeah.
And what I realized when doing a little bit of research into this, just to sort of get some more context, more background on him, because I knew him by his artwork more than I knew anything about the person, but was that he was very early on an art editor at IPC. No, not just art, but that sort of editing busybody in the editorial suite, and that he had worked early on Whizzer and Chips.
Yeah, very briefly.
And
I think,
whole number of
wasn't it?
other, other Buster and some other IPC stuff.
Monster Fun, Valiant. Yeah, there's
Monster Fun, Valiant. While running those things around, So I guess my exposure to him was even unawares, because he was working on things that I was reading at the time as a kid. Whizzer and Chips was that was my weekly comic. He said he preferred Buster, Kevin O'Neill, which was a bit disappointing, and he didn't like Whizzer and Chips, but I was always a Whizzer and Chips kid. So it was like, I guess at some point in there, I would have seen, his corrections or his letters or stuff like that without even knowing it. And then I found out that when he moved over to 2000 AD, he tapped Pat Mills on the shoulder and asked him if he could do work for 2000 AD, that he did the Tharg head on, was it the very first issue?
I think it was. He talks a bit about
it was
people...
under the spinner or something.
Yeah, that's right. People bring it for him to sign, don't they? Just that little bit. They want it signed.
Just that one, and ask him to sign it. So even in the 2000, when I started collecting 2000 AD, he was there somewhere in the background. He's just been sort of this ubiquitous, not influence, but undertow in sort of my comics reading.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And you're right. Visceral is, it's a much occasionally overused term, but it's I can't think of anyone it applies to more. Especially when we were so young reading this stuff.
Well, I remember his Nemesis art giving me nightmares.
Yeah.
Not understanding it when I first read it at that delicate age, and just that I mean, nobody was an artist like he was. Nobody sort of was. His style was so very different and so detailed, but also sort of so terrifying at the same time.
So just unlike anything else
unusual.
We saw.
Completely unusual. I don't think I could probably name in the history of art anybody who's quite as recognizable as Kevin O'Neill.
Yeah, it's a good point,
you
man.
just know it's him when you see it. So, but yeah, I remember back then, it's like reading Nemesis, and prior to that, some of the Robuster stuff, and just his style gave me. I can understand why there were later objections to it, because just the quality of his line and figures and that nightmarish stuff. We're
definitely going to get onto that objection that comes later in America, because I have a theory. My first exposure, I'm thinking, you're right though, it could have been some of the humor comics where I didn't recognize him, and which is interesting in itself when you think that he was one of the reasons that we finally got credits in British comics. It was down to him introducing them. But I think I'm not a prog oneer, but I'm an annual oneer, as I like to call it. So I got the 78 annual, which has got a sort of a short story with a sort of dinosaur monster thing in it. And I remember seeing that, and I can remember vividly sitting in the car reading it on my lap and thinking, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So strange.
It just had that. It was the immediate impact that it had as you looked at it, It was something about the artwork that just hits you like a hammer almost.
Yeah.
Kind of the profound sort of influence that it has on you. Yeah.
Now, I think let's talk a little bit about his influences, which are almost took me a while to understand, because to me, having grown up with a comic artist and a style so vividly, it's hard to then work your way back from it almost, because it's so entrenched in my memory. But he talks about Greg Iron's Skull comics from Rip Off Press being a big influence, and Richard Corbin. And I don't know what you guys think about it, but I have this theory that if he was born in San Francisco, he would be one of the world's biggest underground comics artists and be, you know, Crumb's size, notorious, infamous, famous, whatever you want to call it, you know.
Yeah, his work really feels like outlaw comics, doesn't it? It's got like that heavy rendering style in some panels. It's got like, I don't want to get into it too much because a lot of it's what I'm going to say when we're talking about the comics themselves, but there's definitely links to what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
You can see it. It doesn't quite fit with the mainstream, I suppose, in a lot of ways. It
doesn't, does it? But it's a weird one because I kind of see that because he was mainstream. Yeah. But you're right, it didn't fit. But I almost feel like you have to combine those outlaw rip-off press kind of comics, which were a massive influence on him, with stuff like Ken Reed and Leo Baxendale. You know, that almost grotesquerie humour that we saw in Monster Fun and Whizzer and Chips and all this sort of thing, you know.
Yeah. He is on record with Nemesis the Warlocker saying that what he wanted to do was he wanted to insert some of that underground into that.
Yeah.
Right.
As it was mainstream. So definitely, you know, I mean, as we'll probably get into his, you know, how it all came to be, but and the time period, but that was, you know, that subversive and transgressive nature of his artwork was definitely something that he was the vibe. He called it the vibe. At least that's what he tried to make it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to get Leo Baxendale over at 2000 AD to do stuff, didn't they? At one point in the early days, when him and Pat, I think and Jan Shepherd at the time probably as well, were working on the early days of it.
He was stuck at was it Action or something like that?
I can't remember where it was. Yeah, they couldn't come over. Because they couldn't get him over.
Contractually obligated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, we'll get to it in a minute, but he certainly in his opinion, he didn't arrive artistically until he did his Nemesis work, is what he's saying, which is interesting as well.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because he'd done some Roadbusters, I'm going to say, by that point as well. Couple of other things from his early days. So he was born in 1953 in Mottingham, in a working class Catholic upbringing. He describes comics and TV as occupying him at the time, and he describes it as his bat flying through the window moment was when he watched his dad draw on a cigarette packet, which is really cool.
The only thing he could draw, right?
So good. Was it his dad or his older brother?
Oh,
I thought it was his older brother.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. He loved Marvel Man at the time, which obviously hadn't come back at that point. And he also, now you can, when I read this, I think of course, but he was a big fan of Mad Magazine as well, which is cool.
Yeah.
And he said that was because he was quite a sort of stern Catholic upbringing, which we'll get onto in a minute. It was if someone was caught with Mad Magazine at school, it was confiscated by the teachers, and I have definite memories of that sort of thing happening to me. So 3 Harvey Awards, 2 Eisners, an Eagle Award, and a Bram Stoker Award. Like, incredible career for somebody. I don't know what you guys think. For somebody who didn't have a massive back catalogue of work like some American creators, and seemed very loyal to probably 2 writers. I'm going to say Pat and Alan Moore. And he did work with other people, but not extensively, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, he seemed to. Sorry, and go ahead, man.
I was just going to say he did do a lot of pages for those 2 writers, though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Going into hundreds of pages for each one. But
yeah,
you're right. Not as many different books as you'd expect someone with those sort of accolades that you've just listed.
And he clearly enjoyed working with them both. I mean, sorry to interrupt, Cliff. He was saying like, there's an old interview, like a 1980s TV interview with Pat and Kev, with Kev drawing, like on these sort of pop shows, you know. And they said, how do you know a story's working? I think Kev says, because me and Pat spend hours on the phone just laughing at stupid story ideas. And it's very similar to, from what I understand, the relationship he had with Alan Moore, where they would just like ring each other up and have a laugh, you know.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think, I think a part of that was he had the opportunity to choose, you know?
Yeah.
I think, and who, after Pat Mills, having Alan Moore is sort of, well, then you've sort of hit
Yeah, you got the two big ones,
right?
really.
I mean,
Where'd you go from there?
Yeah. I just, it was just, I don't know that he was necessarily motivated to work with other people, or maybe, I don't know what, that would have been an interesting question, is how much did other people solicit, Kevin O'Neill?
Yeah, come
Did
to him
that
and say,
happen?
I've got a great idea,
Yeah.
Kev. I mean, I've met Kev a few times, and as all of us are, he's a man of many facets, and sometimes he was sort of hilarious, and sometimes he was quite frosty, which is certainly a vibe that I like to give out occasionally. As it stops people sending me their stupid comics to review. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But so what we've done is we've spent some time looking at some different areas of his work, and we're going to try and take it chronologically as much as we can. So, did you want to say what you're going to talk about, Cliff? We're going to start with you, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So you very kindly gave us a choice of things to sort of throughout his career to focus on, and one of the most profound and influential parts of his career for me was definitely Nemesis the Warlock.
Yeah.
Which from the very origins of it as just a 6-page chase scene that was created to piss off the IPC censors to
off the back of a Jam song going underground, wasn't it?
Yeah, so there was this comic rock idea that they had, which was supposed to be stories that were influenced by different songs, and that didn't take off. But it did. What happened was it did give rise to the very first Torquemada short, which was just an extended chase scene between Nemesis and Torquemada through the tubes of the I can't even, was it termite? Yeah.
Yeah.
Later
so the terror tube.
Termite.
Yeah. It's
seen
seen
terror
as
tube.
It's kind of seen as the prologue, isn't it, in a way? I think.
Yeah, and that's my understanding, is that they did this short basically. So, we're back in 70? It's episode 167. It's been going for a while. Kevin's sort of looking for something, and he approaches Pat about being in it. So he ends up doing this 6-page short that Pat has written, based on the Jam song Going Underground. Now, as they've later acknowledged, there's really very little sort of parity between the two. The Jam songs go, other than they go underground into the tubes, and there's a jam of traffic. It's very literal, but it gave, so it was in reaction to this, there was a censor at IPC, a man named Bob Bartholomew, who had objected to a chase scene in Robusters that they had conceived. And it was Pat and Kevin, being reactionary, and of course, being young and pushing back against authority, which was kind of the oeuvre of the period, right, with punk and everything else, and and so there are these young Turks within the office pushing back against too much censorship. So Pat conceives this idea of doing a chase scene, which ended up being the very first appearance of Nemesis and Torquemada. And it just turned out to be hugely popular with the readers. So they followed on by launching the Nemesis the Warlock series, which it's kind of interesting, because we're talking about the number of pages that Kev O'Neill did for Pat, and he really wasn't on Nemesis the Warlock for a very long time.
He came and went a little bit, didn't he? And then in the last issue, he came back, didn't he? And did a story. So exactly, but and you need to understand, like, there was the 1,000 progs. It was between 1977 and the final story. What was it, Torquemada the God or something like that, being the very final story in the telling. There was, it was 77 to the year 2000, which was when the very final prog came out. Kev left because he was having financial difficulties. Yeah, and he wasn't getting paid
working
much.
for IPC.
Yeah, and
Couldn't
I think
get paid.
I think he said the sort of sheen of fun had left a bit. He said by that point,
Yeah, so interesting you would say that. So much later on I looked at an interview in about 2015, and there was a quote that he gave. Sorry, I just have to go back through my long page of notes here to try and find it, where he was talking about working on Nemesis, and he said this several times, that it was like it's the thing I'll always be happiest about. The thing that gave me the most pleasure. This is a quote here, and the most laughs is Nemesis the Warlock. When we worked on that, I think it was the happiest period, even though management didn't like it. It was a deeply unpopular strip within the walls of IPC, but it had a big reader following. So, of course, they were like, okay, we'll go along with it just as long as it stays popular. They hated it, but clearly, as long as it was making money, that's what he said, they'll go along with it. And even if they don't either understand it or particularly liked it. So he said, I love working on that. In the early days, I was on staff, and just the pleasure of putting the comic together. So, so you can sort of tell looking at his early work on Nemesis.
I know you mentioned this earlier, and I kind of... We found a section of work where he talked about how he works with Pat. I think I sent it to both of you, didn't I? And you saw it, didn't you? I think. Yeah. And how Pat rings him up with an idea. They talk for hours, and then Pat goes away and writes it. And then
Kevin said that the point that they knew that they had something was when they started laughing.
Yeah. And that also might explain why he didn't have so many writers that he worked with, maybe, Tony. Because
that's a good point. Yeah,
he seemed to have that almost like co-creative sort of spirit to everything that he did. Everything seems to be as much his as the writers, doesn't it?
Yeah,
he's not just along for the ride. He's heavily involved in creating the characters, creating the sort of world that's going to be built by Pat.
And I think having a laugh is got to be a big part of it. And I know you said in our chat, Cliff, that's how you and I work together. And the stories we come up with we just did because they made us laugh during a number of conversations.
Right. Yeah, the best stuff that we've ended up doing, I think we just found hilarious, and I got the sense that that's something Pat and Kevin shared, because he said, as soon as they started going back and forth, they knew they had something. They were laughing about either bits and pieces. And it's interesting because he was talking a little bit about how censorship became even more of a crackdown over their period at 2000 AD. So, he does say the joy slightly ebbed out of it as he was doing that production. So, it's clear that he was motivated by really enjoying the work that he was doing. And if he didn't enjoy it, I think he kind of probably wouldn't have done it. And, I think he was really enjoying the work that he would do with Kev O'Neill and Alan Moore, because he stuck with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen for a really long time.
Man, decades.
Lots of pages came out of that, right? And I think if the money had been there, he would have stuck with Nemesis the Warlock for equally as long.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning here that, he was writing Serial Killer, the novels, with Pat even after League had finished.
Right.
So they
had a lifelong working relationship.
Yeah, and he seemed to keep that with both of them, which I've kind of got a lot of time for him for. And I know I alluded to him being a bit frosty, which, admittedly he could be sometimes. But watching interviews and hearing him talk enthusiastically, there's almost like a boyish enthusiasm in him.
Yes.
And whenever he's doing an interview, no matter who with, he's laughing at his own memories of stuff, which I think is lovely.
He was definitely motivated, I think, a lot in Nemesis the Warlock by and within the offices of IPC by this friction of sort of trying to do something almost renegade,
which was seen. And Pat's the, if there's ever any two people to be in cahoots with who are renegades, it's Pat and Alan, isn't it?
Right, exactly. And in this case, striking back against their Catholic heritage and their experiences, and also, but doing so in a way that sort of, ridiculed, satire almost of those infrastructures and institutions, So I think he's really motivated by knowing that his art is doing something. I think, he did zines as well back in the early days.
He did some Harryhausen thing. He ended up going around his house or something, didn't he?
Well, he wanted to get into animation.
That's right.
Is what he said. And there were two animators. There was only one animator in the UK I forget the name of it. It was a double-barreled name. It was a guy and his wife, and he called them up and said, I'd like to get into animation. The guy said, well, do you have any experience? He said, no, where can I get experience? And the guy said, here.
That's right. Yeah.
And then because he was interested in zines and things like that and horror and animation, he called up Harryhausen and like you said, went to his house and then apparently had a relation, they
had a friendship,
sort of engaged with each other, friendship for a little while. So he said he's quite shy and introverted, which I can really see, but that he knew that he needed to push himself out of the boundaries of his own comfort zone to be able to sort of make something of his life.
Yeah, it's interesting, man.
Make some progress, which was a very interesting kind of thing. But I think
I've spoken about my relationship. Sorry, man. I've spoken about my relationship with Nemesis, a number of times on the ACP, but we're obviously all friends with Pat, and honoured to be, and he's a good friend of all of ours. But I actually became friends with Pat because of Nemesis in a weird sort of way. So I'd met Pat a number of times over the years. He very kindly says he remembers, but I don't think so. I met him at conventions and stuff.
Right.
And I was reading, he had like an online autobiography thing going on, and I wrote him and said, I didn't realise that Torquemada in Nemesis, who's the human, aka the villain, I didn't realise he was based on a guy called Brother Solomon, who was Pat and I went to the same school, which I then found out, and was a teacher of both Pat and a housemaster of mine as a boarder. And the bloke was a fucking animal. The bloke was fucking trash. And I sent Pat this and I said, it's interesting. And he said, well, why don't we meet for a coffee? So we met up and we've been friends since, which is about 15 years ago. Yeah, and he's such a lovely guy. And his friendship with, I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but his friendship with Kev was genuinely really touching. And Pat lives in Spain. Kev went out to see Pat in Spain, and just before I'd been out, I think. And Pat said to me, we thought we might go to this, new age cafe. And I said, I'm up for going there. That's fine. And he says, we took Kev there, but he didn't really like it. So I said, okay, I'll give it a go. Well, you can see it's all like wheatgrass drinks and stuff like that, And I think Kev said something, I hope Pat doesn't mind me repeating this, something like, I just want a cup of tea, Pat. It's like that. Which I think is lovely and also sums up kind of how I see him, the boy from Mottingham.
He strikes me as sort of he grew up in a working class family, and his father was a cabinet maker or something like that.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah.
A working class family, clearly in a Catholic community. What did he say? It was just outside Chislehurst.
It's Mottingham, which is kind of Nottingham. Bromley, Chislehurst, Catford, that kind of area. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get the sense that he also didn't have the same kind of experiences at school that I think maybe you and Pat had. He although he said he knew it was all kind of ridiculous when he was doing it, he didn't endure any kind of significant abuse that at least that he wanted to talk about. So
I think we all got it. I mean, he talks about being whacked a lot, which we all got,
the Mad magazine thing, and getting 6 of the best for that. So it's interesting sort of where those backgrounds divert a little bit. So
Nemesis is such an interesting case study that there's only that sliver of comic fans get, I think.
Yes.
The 11 o'clock comics was just on their forum today, and they I haven't listened to the episode properly yet. I've only just started it. They talk about their favourite anthologies on today's episode, and I was thinking 2000 AD.
Yeah.
But it's never properly transferred to America or anywhere else, has it really?
The anthology style of comics in America is not one that's well known. I mean, all the comics were anthologies back when they started, but they very quickly around the 50s and 60s just became like single stories.
But all of our comics were anthologies, over here.
That's right. Everything in the UK was an anthology, pretty much, So, where history divided there in the US was, I just think those sort of short stories is something that, just never caught on here.
Yeah. We were chatting to Des because Des got the license to sell. Whether he got the license or not, I don't know. It's Des, but Des ended up selling 2000 AD stories in comic book form in America, through Eagle Comics, I think they were called. And
yes, not very good.
Yeah, there's a couple of the collections. The colour collection of Nemesis, hardback, has got a lot of the covers in the back for that, and there's some actually really nice covers. And I had one as my Instagram image, and Des said, that comes off one of our comics. He was like this, he loved it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
I always remember the getting episodes of Judge Dredd, and they would be in color, but because of the difference between the A4 sizing and the comic size over here, they
completely fucked it, didn't it? Yeah,
they fucked it. They just basically all they did was they squished it in. You know, so it was all off. You'd have a super thin Judge Dredd with the kind of his eyes would be off and stuff.
Good. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That was a good one. So we're going to continue the chat, but I think I'm going to be the shit sandwich between the beautiful pieces of bread that are you two, and talk just for a second talk about Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Annual, which is the 2-issue story that got Kevin O'Neill banned by the Comic Code Authority. Called Tigers. It's written by Alan Moore, art by Kev O'Neill, letters John Costanza, colours Anthony Tollin, editors Len Wein and Andy Helfer. There's a couple of fucking names for you. So this is a really interesting. I know both of you have seen it. Have you read these stories, guys?
I haven't.
No,
I read them back when they first came out.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember picking them up because I was a fan of Kevin O'Neill from the Nemesis and Warlock stuff. Yeah, so I think I may have gotten them from Forbidden Planet. So I read them when they came out, and I remember, I don't know what it was, being a little disappointed to see the work in color, I think.
Okay, interesting.
Then. Yeah.
Because what happened with it is, it's a story of Abin Sur, who was the Green Lantern, for all you Green Lantern nerds out there, was the Green Lantern originally who hands his ring over, in the Silver Age story. Now, he's on a planet... He visits a planet called Ismalt, a.k.a. the Empire of Tears. So already I'm thinking, come on, Alan. Do you know what I mean? And it's a forbidden territory. It's designated forbidden by the Guardians of Oa. And there's a fucking sea of strange-looking creatures. Now, this originally... and we'll talk about why I think it got banned in a minute, but... what happened was it got submitted as a backup strip in the Green Lantern comic, which was on the rise at the time because Dave Gibbons had done quite a lot of issues, I think, at that point. And it got banned. So went submitted to the Comics Code Authority, and they said, no, you can't print that. And I think Len Wein or Andy Helfer said, well, why? And they said, we haven't got a specific reason. We just object to the whole style of it. Which is fucking genius. So I think, as he tells it, O'Neill was in America, and he spoke to one of the editors. I can't remember who it was now. And he said, "Have you got a copy of the Comics Code?" And he managed to get his hands
on a visit to DC.
Yeah. He managed to get his hands on a copy of the Comics Code, and he also managed to get a phone number. And he thought, I'm going to fucking ring him up. So he rang him up and said, the way he tells it, he says, can I come over and have a chat? And they just screamed, there's nothing to see here, and slammed the phone down on him. Obviously panicking that this Englishman, they were well aware they just banned, is trying to come over and give him a kicking probably. He probably just wanted to see them. According to him, he said, I just wanted to see the rubber stamps. I have a feeling if he went there and there was a few rubber stamps that say banned or cancelled or something, he'd have a couple of them in his pocket. I certainly would have nicked a couple of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Didn't he say he had a feeling it was just a bunch of old ladies or something in an office somewhere? Yeah.
Now, a couple of years later, or less than a year, I think, actually, it came out in the Tales of the Green Lantern Annual, which didn't have the Comics Code Authority stamp on. Now, this is credited as being the story that may have started the rot that caused the end of the Comics Code Authority, because obviously they're not an existing force at the moment. There's a couple of reasons. Sorry, mate, go on.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Yuck. Yeah.
Now,
anyway,
allegedly, when he got banned, he also ran up Alan Moore and said, "Alan, I've got to tell you, the story's not coming out because the Comics Code Authority have just banned my style." And apparently, Alan Moore said, "Oh, Kev, I'm so jealous," which is fucking brilliant.
Did he say he didn't talk to him for like a year after that because of that?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he said he was so jealous that they didn't talk for a year.
Now, look, that's clearly a bad decision. Obviously a bad decision. However, they did crucify a creature that looked like a toothy vagina in that comic.
Yeah, I've seen that.
If you see a vagina there, that's really disturbing. No, it does look a bit vagina-like, especially the fact that he's got a head that looks like a tongue.
Yeah. And also it's been crucified. So I kind of think they were fucking taking a piss with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it came out eventually. It came out very, not long after. It was so brilliant. But, and I think Alan's kind of got, Green Lantern, you can probably do what you like with. It was Alan Moore, the hot new thing from England, Kevin O'Neill working on it. And but in it, at the end, it actually predicts the end of the Green Lantern Corps in it, which is quite a bold move for them both. And, you've got this outrageous style coupled with this sort of, basically Alan Moore saying this is when the Green Lantern Corps are going to end, and kind of what Alan Moore says kind of gets laid down in law these days, doesn't it? Certainly what has been for decades. And then you crucify a vagina in the same issue.
And it's not just like a crucifixion, it's like pins, right? It's
with a Green Lantern pin.
Yeah, Green Lantern pin right in the middle.
Yeah, it's almost like Alan Moore saying, who the fuck do these people think they are?
Yeah, it's
space cops,
You could imagine them just howling over the idea of creating like a crucified vagina creature and being like, okay, fuck it, let's take a shot at the Comics Code Authority and see what we can get, like, because things like Vertigo and stuff like that were happening at the time, and I know Alan Moore was the new hotness, and but if I recall correctly, from the time the Comics Code Authority was something that, as people started more and more getting into buying comics because they had turned in this slightly darker direction, the Comics Code Authority was losing its influence and power.
Yeah, you look at Stan famously turned his back on them, didn't he, for the Spider-Man drugs issue and stuff like that. Yeah. And I can imagine after, this was coming in when DC was in a much more successful place than it was, actually purposely being like, okay, let's fire shots fired, with this. So, and let's face it, Alan was pushing some stuff in Swamp Thing as well, wasn't he?
He was. I think he really objected to the limitations being put on comics by things like the Comics Code Authority, which was just a sort of an anachronistic infrastructure of the 50s that, nobody else had to put their artistic work through, as this censorship.
And we had stuff like Warrior going on in the UK, and there was certainly a revolution going on. We've talked about before, the 80s were the single best time for comics.
Exactly. Yeah. And not to mention, though, that, Alan Moore and Kevin and Pat were all of a time when people were really pushing back against authority, the age of punk and everything else.
I think that's the first line Jonathan Ross wrote in the Accident Man introduction, wasn't it? I think it says, Pat Mills is a punk. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Slane was a punk. Slane's a punk barbarian, isn't he? We talked about this before, didn't we, Ian?
And Jonathan Ross is in the front of this edition of Martial Law I've got, saying the same sort of thing as well.
Right. Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to that. It's a good time. So the third one is the Martial Law stories, which you got. Did you get the hardback, or how did you get it?
I've just got it digitally, and a couple of single comics. In fact, Matt Bunce off the Slack, he sent me Kingdom of the Blind, which was very kind of him. So I just wanted to mention that. But
Matt's good. Matt rang me or messaged me the other day saying I'm in an Oxfam and they've got some Killraven comics. Have you got these ones? How cool is that one? What a nice dude.
Yeah, he said the same. He found it in he was just in a charity shop and he put it up on the Slack and I said, "Oh, can I have it?" And he sent it to me. It was just really kind. So thank you to Matt.
Good stuff.
So I'm doing another one where it's like Kevin O'Neill and Pat Mills again. Just going back to Nemesis briefly, I found it really interesting that that Nemesis design is so bizarre, isn't it? And I read that he designed the Blitzsphere first, the ship that he flies about in, and it was Pat who said, make Nemesis head look like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think he designed Nemesis differently, hadn't he? And and Pat said, and he says, I'm having a problem with this. I don't really know whether I like it or not. And Pat said, well, why don't you make the head like the split spear? And it suddenly clicked. And he says he can almost automatically draw Nemesis's head now. And as someone, Cliff's just drawn him. I can't imagine he's an easy fucking person to draw at all, is he?
He's not easy. I know.
Well, you've drawn him as well, Ian, haven't you? Yeah.
Ian's already done.
I did, yeah. I it's so difficult because you've got that sort of nose where it's got 4 like fins coming off, in almost like a cross sort of situation, and it's so difficult to get it right depending on which angle you're doing it. And that's one of the things in Nemesis that I just can't get my head around, drawing that character and understanding it from so many different directions. It's just
you've got some really different takes on the Hinkleton stuff, and the funny you've brought back a sort of a childish memory of mine by saying that, Ian, saying it's like a cross. And as a kid, I think I thought it was like a religious icon type face in a weird way.
Well, maybe it is. You won't put it past them. And then there's other characters in it, like Great Uncle Ball. I love that.
That's the best story.
Panel,
that was
sat on the human skeleton, and the chair starts talking to him and stuff like that. It just
so O'Neill says that was his favorite strip that he did for Nemesis. That was his favorite one, but apparently it didn't, because he was also talking about the readers' votes and things like that that they used to do, but it was not the most popular amongst the readers. But yeah, I agree with you that the design on that, just that was half of that stuff was just, that's what was so amazing,
and like little bits, and those aliens that are sort of half people, half plant, where they've got like twigs growing out of them, and he's so brutal to them as well. It's so great, isn't it?
I genuinely think he's probably 2000 AD's greatest designer. I mean, Carlos did Dread, but I think you've got the ABC Warriors, you've got Nemesis, and you've got so many things that are just fucking. ABC Warriors is probably my second favourite strip.
I don't think as a nation we appreciate what we had in all those artists that come through, because they were all the best at what they did.
Yeah,
agree.
Brian Bolland is the best. Bisley,
Gibbons,
best painted comics. It just goes on, and then you've got Kevin O'Neill, and how do you describe his work? And that I kept on asking myself, how do I go about describing it and describing martial law? Because I know you and Dan have talked about this on another NIA episode, and Dan talked about the story in length. So just revisiting it really for the artwork mainly, and I just kept on thinking there's so many sort of contrasts in his work. He's got let me see what I've sort of said, and I've just said I said it in my notes, I found it to be almost like Outlaw Comics, incredibly elaborate layouts, intricate details.
Yeah,
there's a bit of an intended naivety to some of the drawings, some of the proportions seem a little bit wonky, but I feel like that's because he's leaning into his own style of drawing. He's an incredible artist, and
there's a lot of instinctual strokes that seemingly fit into a sort of spiky architecture. Sometimes it all seems to come together.
Rhythm, repeated shapes across all the panels and stuff like that. I sort of said, like, one of the things is you just described him as the best designer. I completely agree with that. The costume designs are just crazy. Like, how many different characters did he create in this book? And it's on a par with some of the greats. The amount of different ideas that have come out with it as well. And there's organic shapes and geometrical shapes, and I've written down as well, like, it's very visceral, which is a word that Cliff used at the start. And I was also listening to interviews by Kevin. He was talking about symmetry and saying how it makes him feel sick. And I thought that was so
genius.
So he was talking about, I don't like sitting in all these Italian plazas, and they make me feel sick because they're all so perfectly geometrical and perfectly symmetrical and beautiful. And it's like, I just feel a bit kill being there.
I've got a beautiful image of him sitting there, you know, with a coffee, waiting for someone to arrive, and just looking up at the, fuck's sake, he's getting grumpy looking at the ceiling.
That's the actual epitome of like human beauty that we've been able to create, and he's just making him feel sicker and sicker. And I thought that is so odd, because we're all sort of pre-programmed. It's like completely at odds in like our natural sensibilities to loathe symmetry. You know, models have their faces photoshopped so they look like a perfect reflection from one side to the other, but he's coming at the world in a completely different way, and
maybe that's the truth.
Turning everything on its head. What we all accept as being beautiful, he's obviously seeing everything.
Well, maybe he's the only sane person. You know, there's that famous story about the 1984 TV series, isn't there? With Big Brother watching them, you know, and I think it was Peter Cushing, wasn't it? It's sort of late 50s, early 60s TV series, I'm going to say. And to make the image of Big Brother more frightening, they basically photographed a face and then just took one side and flipped it.
Yeah.
And that was the authoritarian look to it, you know.
Yeah, and one of the greatest asymmetrical characters in comics is Judge Dredd. I know that's a different one, but there's a bit of asymmetry to martial law, you know, where he's got the barbed wire down one arm and the other one's sort of clothed in leather. But that character design is just, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, the mask on it almost becomes like face painted sometimes, because it's almost
expressionistic.
It's not like a traditional mask at all, and it's got like fascist elements and like bondage or fetish sort of elements of all the lead and the red lightning bolts going across it. It's really a crazy design, and then he just goes one up all the time from that point on.
I think with the costume as well, he uses, you know, he could have easily just done a black costume, but he uses traditional superhero colours.
Blue, yeah. Well, primary colours, which we associate with people like Superman. Yeah, he's got that on the public spirit, and that's just a primary colour character. Celeste is pretty much primary colours as well. Yeah, and then you've got the sort of black and red for martial law, which would be usually your baddie, wouldn't it? So that's it being reversed round again.
It's interesting when you see in the days of people will be going, oh, that's just like The Boys. This predates The Boys. That character whose name I can't remember in The Boys, you know, the big bad guy. He's basic. Sorry, Homelander. Thank you. Yeah, he's basically the public spirit, isn't he?
He is. It's a complete rip-off, and then like with martial law as well, he has literally got an inverted cross running down the middle of his face. That's
true. Yeah.
I mean, like, it couldn't be more obvious, could it? And then in the version I've got, it's like you can see there's a real mix of like brushwork and then fine liner work. So there's lots and lots of fine lines everywhere. And I was impressed with the colour work in this. I agreed that the Nemesis book is much better black and white, but the colour on Nemesis I think really, really works. And
in martial law, you mean?
Sorry, in martial law, it really stands out as a big part of the artwork for me.
So, interestingly enough, you can see where he changed his style a little bit. In between Nemesis to martial law, to Green Lantern to martial law. So he was very aware of the sizes I think he was working in and kind of the amount of detail that he needed to add. So I don't know if you see that at all, Ian, but he's one of those guys. One of the most difficult things you can do is free up space so that, you know, to think ahead to the future for colors and things like that. You know, so leaving white space, but he did that. I felt like, or at least he evolved along the martial law telling.
Funny enough, this is the first time ever I've sort of had both books in front of me, and I think there is quite a big difference between the work you see in Nemesis and the work you see in martial law.
There's more panels, isn't it? It's more panel structure.
Yeah. And I think I don't know. I think he uses like repeated imagery a lot in martial law. There's that sequence across the double page where it's just like martial law is sort of almost exactly the same 6-panel grid, and he holds up a sign saying, "Do you go around with a bag over your head?"
I love those pages. I love them.
And
the mirrored pages.
Yes, and it's perfect, isn't it? There's like 1, 2, 3, 5 of martial law, then five of the spirit on the next page as well, so they're completely mirrored.
Yeah,
Which goes back to that.
I remember reading that when it first came out, man, and thinking, "Fuck."
And the next page after that is amazing as well, because it's one where he's sort of the main character on the page, and there's sort of 4 inset pages, and he's looking down. It's just this incredibly striking image of martial law, but he uses color quite a lot as well within patterns. There's a lot of the stars and stripes being used repeatedly as backgrounds, and it's just that rhythm to the storytelling, taking you through it all. It's just so readable.
He talks quite a lot about layering stories with details within images. So there's a lot of graffiti and background stuff, which is he says mostly added by him, but some of it will have been Pat. And he says that it adds, you've got a story, but you add layers to the story by including this stuff in the background, which I think is fucking genius.
Yes.
Really works in this.
Yeah, and there's loads. There's the bomber plane with the crucified Christ along the belly of the plane that's dropping bombs on people. There's, it just wears its heart on its sleeve all the way through, and it just looks like they're having so much fun. You're talking about them laughing about everything they're doing. Everything's just turned up to 11 all the way through it in the artwork. It's, the sleepwalker design that's almost like a Freddy Krueger character with the long fingers. There's a panel in it where he's sort of paying a visit to a woman, and you just see the long fingers sort of reaching out to her face, and the shadows of the fingers are playing across the face, and it's just pure horror. It's perfect. It just looks so good. And there's so much humour in it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and that comes a lot from Pat's lack of knowledge and fucking the fact he finds superheroes hilarious. So there's that story. There's that story where, because Kev got brought up on superhero comics, and I think he sent Pat a copy of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, which is stuff like Matarita Lad and all this sort of stuff, and they just laughed about it on the phone, and that's where one of the stories came from. Pat just found it hilarious. Yeah.
So here's a question. Thinking about it, I don't recall any kind of anti-hero books quite like this, where the superheroes are all seen boys-like as sort of the bad guys prior to this take on it.
Yeah, I don't either.
So it seems to be like a thoroughly original, just like Nemesis was, a thoroughly original story that subverted some of the tropes, because, there were anti-heroes around that time, with Dark Knight Returns and all that kind of stuff, and Watchmen and things like that. But this is the first one where it's like the villains of the piece are the heroes.
Yeah, I agree.
Everything about it's original, isn't it? The concept's original. The artwork is incredibly original. I know you cited some of his influences, but it's really hard to make a strong case for anyone being a massive influence. It just feels like his own thing all the time.
Yeah. The only person I could think of who was anywhere near this ballpark was Drew Ye.
Yeah.
I think.
The French guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then.
But even so, it just seemed like Kevin O'Neill just arrived fully formed. You know what I mean? I mean, his style hasn't changed. Whereas, certainly he changes the style depending on the needs of the print. But he just arrived on the scene, and this was him.
Yeah.
Other people go through sort of huge evolutions in their artwork, but he never did. It was just he just was fully consumed.
How he wanted to draw. I'm sure I've seen an interview with him saying he didn't really know what he was doing, but he just, it's just because it's so instinctual, probably.
I think he just wanted to have fun on the page, and
that comes across, and
it does.
The other thing I've got to mention in this martial law is like the foreshortening and the force perspective in some of the pages as well. There's a page where you can see martial laws fighting the public spirit, and he sort of shot him in the back, and there's sort of an explosion going off behind him, and the way the position of the figure is, with the legs sort of disappearing into the background, so the feet become really small, and then it's coloured in like blues and oranges, which really work together very well as colours. And then the next one, it's back to full colour, and the public spirit's all sort of crouched over, and his fist is massive. It's about 10 times the size of his head, and it shouldn't work, but it absolutely does. And you can just see sort of martial law in the background, sort of in silhouette. But there's so much sort of characters at points leaping out of the page at you, and splash pages as well. I just really loved all of the art in it, and
it's incredible when you think, you know, little old Britain has produced, you know,
this.
From the same comic, we've got Dave Gibbons, who's got this sort of clean, beautiful to look at, you know, lovely flowing storytelling. We've got Brian Bolland with these sort of clean lines. We've got Carlos Esquire, but we've also got like Mick McMahon and Kev O'Neill doing this stuff that's just fucking whacked out, man. You know?
Yeah. And Brian Talbot and John Hecklinton, like you said, who was... I didn't realize until I reread some of the Nemesis stuff just how incredible his stuff was, you know?
It's just out there, man, isn't it?
Yeah. But if I could... This would be something, Ian, you as a sort of an artist and art teacher and everything else. Here's my hypothesis, is that I see O'Neill as ranking with the old medieval masters, and I know Hieronymus Bosch would probably be kind of the go-to comparison,
so much,
but
man.
some of those sort of hallucinatorily driven artists of the Dark Ages, you know, the medieval period, who did the woodcuts of demons and things like that. When I look at Kevin O'Neill's artwork, that is what I see, especially with Nemesis and the religious overtones. But more than anything, I can't personally. I was racking my mind, as you suggested, Ian, to try and find what influences do I see here from artists that I know, and I can't find any. But when I look at his work, it just evokes this sort of the madness of the medieval ages, when they were all eating ergo-ridden bread and all.
I suppose he was
about hell.
I mean, he was a choir boy, wasn't he? And he must have, you know, having been like an altar boy myself, you sort of sit in church, don't you, just staring up at, you know, the Stations of the Cross, or Christ with a crown of thorns, or, you know, you got some stained glass window of someone being stabbed in the side or something, you know.
And that iconography of that, of being a Catholic as well, you know. But it struck me, it's like, you know, when you see works like, I don't know, Malus Malorificum and things like that, you know, where the woodcuts, kind of the common people's sort of pamphlets, where
I think you're absolutely right, and stained glass windows as well as woodcuts, because we talked about there being a lot of straight lines and sharp angles and stuff, and those sort of mediums sort of forced artists down those routes as well, of using straight lines.
The forced perspective as well, you know, of it strikes me a little bit like, you know, that pre-naive style of you know, how of how perspective was rendered before they knew how to render perspective properly. And he takes elements of that and he uses that forcibly in his work, you know, like you said,
like on a tapestry almost, you know.
But I mean, you know, if I didn't know better, you know, you could say some of these things were lino cut or wood cuts, just some of the ways that he manages to get that ink on the page. Well,
that's
beautiful,
really interesting, man. And I think you've answered some of what we talked about a bit on the WhatsApp group, and that is the big question that occurs to me all the time, but I think is the perfect time to ask you two about it, because you're both artists, is how much the artist is visible in their art. And I was going to put it to you about Kev, but I think we've kind of explored that a little bit with the religious stuff and the influences, and like you say about these sort of medieval paintings and stuff. But if you can maybe apply yourselves to it, are you... I come at it from, you know, someone who can't draw, but are you visible within your own art? Is your heart and soul on the page? Can we describe you through the way that you draw? You know, is your life experience there as part of what you're drawing? If you don't mind me saying so about you, Cliff, if we'd start off with you, you're a funny guy, man, and I see a quirky character on the page with you. It's, you know, you're not
Yeah.
Kurt Swan. Do you see what I'm saying? Is that, I don't mean to be rude in any way. I actually mean
No,
it to
no,
be,
no. And in fact,
yeah.
if you did compare me to Kurt Swan, I probably would
Yeah,
not be
I know what you mean, but
happy with that comparison.
But I mean, you're more in the same way. I kind of almost empathically believe that I know what someone like Frank Quietly is about a little bit from the way he
Yeah.
draws. I feel the same about your art in a similar
So
way.
yeah, I think you're correct. I mean, what is like our artistic skill except a summation of, the influences that we've allowed ourselves over the course of our lives, right?
Yeah, everything. Yeah,
So, all of the things that I enjoy, and, coming to a personal style is a very personal journey. Getting to the point where,
Yeah.
you go through sort of stages. First of all, there's the naive copying stage where you find artists that you like, and then you kind of copy them and you learn some stuff. Then you cut loose from that a little bit, and those influences sort of fight over each other. So that's the period of discovery where you're trying to sort of come up with your own style, but still, everything is so fresh in your head about all of the artists that you like and everything else that they compete for attention. And then finally you get to a point where you're free of that sort of innate warring of different influences, and your own style emerges.
Yeah.
And that's when you as an artist kind of develop your own voice, I believe.
Is that when you are happy with it most? When you think, is that an element of being not content, but more content than perhaps you would have been previously? I guess
Yes,
you guys are never completely content with a page, are you?
No artist should ever. Any artist who says they're completely happy with their style has completely ceased to evolve as an artist, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah.
So you're never entirely happy with what you produce. You're always seeing the weaknesses in it. For me, if I look back on it and I'm like, I get past that sort of self-doubt stage, and some people have maybe had some sort of something to say about it, then you get over that kind of sort of thing. You're like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. I kind of enjoyed drawing it.
Yeah.
So for me, what I try and bring to the art is definitely a degree of transgressiveness. As you probably know, I'm sort of very drawn to sort of breaking the mold on characters and stuff like that. I don't think
Yeah.
my style changes hugely unless I really intentionally try and change it, but I can definitely feel those underpinnings of more of the ethos of the time when I was growing up reading comics. That's sort of definitely the stuff that influenced Pat and Kevin and probably Alan Moore, that sort of radical time in the 80s where
Yeah.
we were trying to force sort of, stick some stuff in the face of the man. And I definitely am more drawn to drawing stuff like that.
The more we
That
talk
sort of
about the
maybe
80s,
raises an eyebrow.
the more you and I talk about Ian, and everyone talks about that period, Eamon especially, the more I realise how special it was and what a great time to have lived through it.
It was the greatest period. This is like, I don't want to, sorry, Ian, you're a young guy, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of just an old man for a second. But, that period was the high watermark of comics.
Yeah.
As a genre.
And still is. Yeah.
And will always be, especially particularly that year 1986 when it all kind of changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, man.
So, very much, I think, as a product of the 80s comics scene, it was always trying to push forward, trying to be a little transgressive,
Experiment.
trying
yeah.
to be experimental. Yeah, exactly. And not just be like this comfortable mass-produced form anymore that was just four colors, and Ben-Day dots. It was about actually saying something.
Yeah.
And I would say that's definitely, you can definitely see my sense of humor, I think, in my work.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that you sent that really resonated with me was how Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill, Kev's always adding stuff to the artwork.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's something I'm always doing to you in your scripts as well.
We
sticking
almost
shit in.
almost weekly. You say to me, "What about this?" I say, "Oh yeah, I'm going for that, mate." Yeah.
Very good. And that's the stuff that keeps me entertained and motivated and drawing is as I draw, kind of like I can see sort of little things that I like to put in that just are sort of, I don't know.
There's the
funny
famous
or stupid.
There's a famous example of I think this is a martial law story. I'm not sure if you read this in, but there's a bit where they were saying that they had a big discussion about what they wanted to do with the character, and Kev really wanted to grab the character's dog and kick it over the mountain.
Yeah.
and Pat felt bad because he didn't think he could fit it in, but he really wanted to put it in. And that is a perfect example of two people who are just enjoying the collaboration so much they just fucking are laughing their tits off. You know,
Right.
Getting to you, in, is it possible to and I mean this in a way, kind of beyond the literal, but is it possible for me to know you just through your art? Are there elements? Can you see elements of your own personality, your own choices, your own interests in your art? Is there a sense of personality through what you're putting on the page there?
Yeah, I think I'm almost like not the opposite to Kevin O'Neill. I want everything to look beautiful and perfect, and
Which it does, my
really
friend. Yeah.
funky, but I feel like sometimes it can be restrictive as well. And I think it comes back from feeling that a lot of pressure, I always put a lot of pressure on myself to try and make everything as well drawn as I possibly can. Whereas sometimes comics doesn't have to always be as well drawn as you possibly can to tell the best version of the story.
Yeah.
I get lost in detail, and I get lost in making sure the anatomy is as accurate as I can possibly make it, and the perspective is right. And sometimes I'll force that perspective, or I'll play around with the anatomy a little bit, but I always feel that there is a restriction there. So one of the things that I try and do is really try and work on my movement, and try and really to break a lot of habits that I had prior to coming into comics. And I think in a lot of ways, comics has really saved my love of the subject. I was teaching it for a long time, but when you teach it, you draw a lot, but you draw in a very short amount of time, because you're dealing with people's attention spans all the time, being maybe shorter than you'd like. You know, you'd maybe want to show something over an hour, but you've only got like 5 minutes really to give in a lesson. And I really wanted an endeavor where I could express myself through my art, and comics that's where it all came from, because I've really enjoyed that process of telling a story across multiple panels. And I'd always been really interested in book illustration, and golden age book illustrations, and a pulpy kind of book covers and stuff like that. And yeah, you put little flourishes in that are very personal. You know, I put little nods to my family and stuff into some of my pages.
Yes, we were talking about that recently, weren't we? Yeah.
And lightness.
Do you think there's a clash between perfection and energy sometimes? Do you think the more...
There can be, and I think people accuse Alex Ross of that a lot.
Yeah.
Although I think I did get his Full Circle book, and I thought that was absolutely... I really thought that was... I really appreciated your episode on that.
Thank you. I did really enjoy it. Yeah.
I enjoyed it. But this is my point. I get like protective over artists like that, because I'm like, you should see that's amazing drawing. And I think actually I'd sort of got Full Circle, and I set it to one side to go back into martial law, and I just thought, no, this is far more visually interesting than Full, even though I love Full Circle. And that's what made me realize, you know, what a masterclass this is. I'm just looking at a page right now, and it's martial law stood next to Lynn's grave, and he's got a mask on with an inverted cross and a crown of barbed wire thorns across his head as well. So,
so interestingly, I don't think, Ian, that you could probably have an artist who is further away from you in style, in a way. You know what I mean?
No, I don't. I think
that's not to say that you're not you are an incredibly talented fucking artist, always pushing out amazing work, and in your own way, in your own style.
But that's how it should be, isn't it? You know.
And but I think it's, you know, if there's one thing that perhaps we could share as a similarity, Kevin, Ian, and myself as artists, I'm definitely not on Kevin or Ian's level, but is that we put ourselves, that's our art. That is an expression of us. That is our style. And you may like it or you may not like it. That's fine. You know, we each have our own audiences, and there are people who will like Ian's style and hate my style and hate Kevin O'Neill. There are people who will love Kevin O'Neill but hate Ian's stuff. So, you know, part of the beauty of today's comics scene, I think, is that diversification in that, you know, there are we can find audiences for our stuff.
You've got to go your own way, man. There's nothing worse than, you know, if I see another fucking Steven Universe comic, I think I'll throw up.
Exactly.
You know, it's my equivalent of fucking Symmetry.
Yeah, something Disney-ish or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of homogeneous artwork out there. But I think, you know, the thing that if I found out anything about Kevin O'Neill from this is that he was deeply passionate about everything that he put on the page. And the one thing that I will say I hope comes across in my style is that whenever I do a page, that is the best page I can give you.
Yeah.
You know, and that I will have put a huge amount of work into that. And the thing is that that's what I think you can see in the art. And I definitely can see that in Ian's artwork. I mean, you can see that he doesn't half-ass it. He doesn't fuck around. If you get a piece of artwork from Ian Ashcroft, you know that he put heart and soul into that. You know, even the stuff he just doodles around.
Well, let's talk about
get out of this room. My head's going to get too big. Thank you very much for it. Just on that point, really quick. The thing that is in a lot of, I think every comic book artist's work is hours and hours and hours of work, and you set everything aside and huge sacrifices, no matter what level you're at. And that's the bit that I think a lot of people don't see. You know, you turn in the page, but that page may be taking someone a day, a week, who knows how long.
That's it. The blood, sweat and tears that you put into a page is in direct proportion, I think, to how some people will see that, you know.
I feel like I work two jobs. I really do, you know, like I come home, I spend time with my family, and then quite often I'm burning the midnight oil to try and get through as much of this as you can. You'd love to dedicate more time to it. But so that, I think that's where where your real personality comes in, because for me, I'm giving it everything I've got, especially because I've got the opportunity to work with Pat. Yeah. There's no way I'm not going to put everything I have into that project.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, I'm jealous of you two guys. Yeah, definitely. I'm jealous of you two guys for two reasons, really. One, that you can draw, and two, that I can only imagine the joy it must be of like putting your head down and drawing something and then lifting your head up and it's 4 hours later. Yeah,
it's the ultimate in well-being, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point, man.
I wouldn't rather have any other hobby. You know, when I was younger, I wanted to be great at football or a million other things. I never appreciated that I was good at something, and now I just feel genuinely so happy that you've got this thing that you really enjoy doing. I'm sure Chris
I would absolutely agree with that. I would say, Tony, though, that, you know, if it wasn't, not to get on this disgusting kumbaya love train too much, because
don't be nice to me. I know what you like. Don't start being nice to me. Completely out of character.
But I was going to say, like, just to break character for a second, is like, you know, Tony, the thing that I get is that I'm not a great storyteller, but then I get these fucking fucked up scripts from you that challenge me to do something better with my own artwork than I could possibly do myself.
Well, I don't know about that, but
that's the joy.
You get artists coming to you, Tony, asking you to push them and challenge them.
Well, I'm lucky enough to have worked with some great people, and you two being one of them. But I have to say, I showed there's a character coming up called Biff Pilchard. Let's not beat around the bush. He's nothing to do with anyone else. He's a completely original character. Let's say that. Or
representations or likenesses.
They're complete coincidence.
Completely.
But I showed him a certain panel that involves a fisting scene. I'll be honest with you.
That wasn't Biff. It wasn't Biff.
It wasn't Biff. He was present, and I showed it to my mate Dave. Who's been my best friend. You know, we've been best friends since we were 10. And you've met him. You've been out for dinner with him.
Yeah, right? Great guy.
And he's quite a big cheese in TV and movies now. And he said, he just looked at it. He went, "What's he working with you for?" In other words, this is fucking amazing.
I'm working with you, T, because I get to draw those kind of things. In fact, I think I have to go on the record and say I think there was not actually a fisting scene involved in this.
You added. You're right. You are right. I didn't.
In.
Yeah, I didn't write a fisting scene. I'd like that to be known. Yeah, everyone will presume that I wrote that one. It's,
I know.
Yeah.
That's why I put it in. I was like, yeah, everybody will think Tony did this. I'll show you, Ian, when
thank you.
we can put our cameras on.
Yeah,
I never have this situation with Pat.
Well, even when we worked together, Ian, that we worked for a kids comic, so we didn't have anything like that, did we?
No, we didn't.
So you'll appreciate, Ian, having a young kid yourself, how I have teenage kids, and my wife, how I am never showing this to anybody in my family, and I've literally had it on my drawing board and left it open and come down and been like, oh shit, and I had to fold it up and hide it.
Never show it to Mrs. Q before I meet her, because I'm meeting her in a few months or in 6 months' time.
That's right.
Yeah, don't show
that's
them.
Exactly right.
Or Mrs. Ashcroft already thinks some of it's strange, so that's fine.
She doesn't. She really enjoyed meeting you, Tony. That's not true.
Let's bring this home, and then we can have a little talk with you two about your current project. So, it is an absolute terrible shame that we lost him so early. He was only 69 when he passed away.
Oh God,
Kev,
it's awful.
really terrible.
Awful.
But who can say they've got 3 stone cold classics? And that's what I'm calling Martial Law, Nemesis, and League. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen we haven't mentioned much of, but is brilliant. Is, you know, the fucking War of the Worlds stuff, the Island of Dr. Moreau stuff is just incredible, full of detail, typical Kev O'Neill. Really, you know, he sparks as much with Pat as he sparks with Alan, and you know, and those 3 dudes. If the British comics industry was limited to 3 dudes, it'd be those 3 for me. You know, I think that what they've produced is just monumentally incredible. And then if you step past that, he's also got this sort of, I'm going to call them slightly more culty hits, but you got Metalzoic, which was which actually sort of made a number of steps forward in the creator-owned kind of graphic novel field when it got released by DC. You got the Lantern work, which you mentioned. You got the Dodge and Logic stuff. He did Cinema Purgatoria, Robusters, ABC Warriors, and you've also got the serial killer novels, which he did with Pat. He sort of co-wrote with him.
Yeah.
Which are great, which I was lucky enough to beta read on those. They are lovely. They are great books. So a man who has so much, you know, he's given us so much over the, you know, just decades of comic making, you know, and there was never, I think the beautiful thing about him was there was never any pretense in the dude, you know.
No.
He wasn't one of those people who just eulogizes and, you know, diatribes on social media. He was just a real dude, wasn't he? You know.
He's great in that 2000 AD documentary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He's also a guy who never compromised. He did not compromise.
Yeah, he didn't, did he? No,
You know
he
what I
didn't.
mean?
He was banned by the
talks
whole of
about-
the American comic industry,
It was
and he still
talked
didn't
about-
fucking pull back on it. Yeah.
Shit that he was supposed to change, and I mean, we didn't get to where he was talking about the censors seeing fads everywhere in Nemesis, but how he, you know, he just wouldn't compromise. So he made very few changes to his work, I think, you know, every so often, but
Yeah.
man, he stood his ground. That's the great thing about Pat and Alan and these guys, you know.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Yeah. It really is about those 3 dudes, about how they stood their ground and they just took no shit and continued to take no shit, you know.
Yeah.
I've only ever met Alan very briefly, but he was super lovely to me, I've got to say.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, very kind to me. Yeah, in a moment, I think I've told the story before. Actually, I've just been thoroughly fucked off by Chris Claremont, who was just rude to me.
Who hasn't been?
Yeah, what a rude twat.
Massive cock.
As a fucking
Absolute.
as a 12 or 13-year-old, and I was so upset. I was ready to walk out on comics, and I turned the corner and I bumped into Alan Moore and the Karen Berger. And they just said hello to me, just like, "Are you all right?" And I said hello, and as soon as he said that, I thought, "Oh my god, this is the guy who's writing Swamp Thing," you know.
Yeah.
And I was back in again, yeah. But and Pat has been exceedingly kind to all 3 of us over the years, you know. And it's really good.
Pat's class. Yeah,
Good.
for sure.
Right, let's get on to guest projects. So, I sounded very Mega City then, didn't I? That's what he said. God, I ain't going to be after me with copyright infringement. I was speaking to him today, actually. So he and I, he's editing and he's sort of running stuff past me, you know, for sort of second eye and stuff. So DUI 3 is in the works. I think we're almost at the point now where we've got all the stories we need.
We're all in it, right?
Yes. Yeah, well, one of us is on the cover. Let's
One
just
of
say
us.
that one of us.
It's
yeah.
an okay cover. It's fine. I mean,
Fucking masterpiece. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
We were chatting about who to do a cover. I said, "Oh, fucking get Ashcroft to do it," and he didn't say whether he would or not. And then you did issue 2. Come on, Cliff. And,
I did issue 2, but it was like being the opening act of the Beatles, as I've described it before.
And he apparently messaged you, and then 2 days later, this fucking Van Gogh arrived through the post.
It is beautiful.
It is amazing, man. Amazing. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It took me 3 months to do my cover, and Ashcroft just sits down and it's like if you've ever seen that bit of Amadeus with Salieri and Mozart, and just fucking he's like, oh, this is a nice little tune, but how about this?
I just don't know how to respond to you, Cliff.
You've actually been nice to you. It makes a change.
I know. Thank you so much.
So speaking of that cover, the charity for DUI3 is Mind. We sort of crowdsourced who we should go with, and Ian's done a cover that is very applicable to that. But just to talk about Mind for a second, they're a great charity, and thanks to you two guys, we've raised quite a lot of money for the charity with artwork. So Ian did a martial law piece, which he put up for sale online and earned some money. I'll declare, we haven't got the total amount yet, but I'll declare the total amount of it when we get to it. I donated a £5 for people who ridiculously bought pictures of my face on a t-shirt.
You sold a lot.
We didn't do badly. There's a lot of weirdos wandering around my face on their breasts.
I'm definitely one of them. Like I said, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gonna be my nightshirt tee.
This is what Falpy does to me. He goes, "Oh, I'm making t-shirts for Tribute Press." And I went, "All right, what's on them? Your face, brilliant." Okay. And then we've got finally we're still taking bids for Cliff's Nemesis piece of art. Which is the money of which will go to Mind. So how do they find it? How do they get in touch? How do they look at it? And how do they bid?
So absolutely. It's a fantastic Nemesis piece. I had a lot of fun doing it. I've crammed in as much detail as I possibly could. A, in the spirit of Kevin O'Neill, B, because I'm really hoping this will be a wonderful addition piece to anybody who's an old 2000 AD or Nemesis fan. Definitely want it to be display worthy. So I'm going to be doing a push again. We're up to £95 on
good.
The bid.
It's still too cheap, as I keep telling you all the time.
Thanks. I think if we can get it up past the 100 mark, I will be elated by that, and definitely raising that kind of money. I'll pay the postage.
Good man. Thank you, dude.
So don't worry about that. I just want the money, most of the money, to go to Mind, which is, as you said, Tia, just a fantastic charity to do really good work for mental health. You can just find me at CG Cumber, like my first 2 initials and last name, on Instagram, or Twitter. And if you you can either sort of bid underneath the post, or I'm going to post about it again. Just bid underneath the post. Anything £96 and up will be acceptable.
And if you just want to donate a couple of quid to Mind, let us know, and we'll give you a shout on the next episode as well. It's been a good egg.
Also put an offer out there on the 11 o'clock comic Slack. I do need to say thank you to those guys. They allowed me to post it on their on their forum, which was very, very kind.
Well, I know you got an OA piece through there, which you sent me and Ian. I can't remember, was it last week? And you said, "Oh, I'm doing this now, this piece of OA." And I've purposely not asked you how much you're charging the person for it, because I know I will shout at you if you tell me.
Yeah, and I'm purposely not going to tell you, because I don't want you to shout at me.
when we were at Heroes.
Here we go.
I had the 2 art monkeys drawing, and some bloke comes over and he goes, and
me and Falpy.
And Cliff's drawing this thing, and some dude, lovely, the nicest dude in the world, comes over and he goes, "Oh, that's really nice. Is it for sale?" And you went, "Yeah, 15." And he goes, "Oh, 50, that's a bargain." And he pulls his wallet out to give you $50, and you went, "No, 15."
No, 15.
And I went, "Fuck,
that's crazy."
I did have a bad habit of sort of saying, "Well, what do you think it's worth?"
Just giving it away. I do that. I just never can.
But I tried to communicate to Tony that this was actually a marketing strategy that would just be like, you give them a taste and then, then you jack up
next
the charges.
year when we're back at Heroes, they'll come back in.
He wasn't having any of it.
We went from being the tribute press table to being just me repping you two guys drawing.
That's right. Yeah. That was it was good times, man.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And Ian, your piece is lovely, man. I have to say, your fucking martial law, beautiful, full colour. Yeah. Just amazing. Yeah.
It's gone to a good home, so it's just nice to raise a bit of money for mine. But the piece that Cliff's done, let's get it over 100 because it's absolutely amazing.
Let's try our best. Yeah,
it's worth it just for the sword with all the skulls on the hilt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a little bit of Kevin O'Neill sort of additional. Yeah, the sword has death, this end written on it. So, which I felt was a kind of O'Neill flourish.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about what you're working on. So, Ian, your full-on Pat's project. Can you talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, I'm full on it. I'm chipping away at it. I'm wanting it to be comparable to other books that he's put out there. So it means I have to raise my game as high as I can get it. Goes back to what I was saying before, just that trying to put out the best I can. And so far, Pat's happy with what's been going on.
It looks amazing, man. Yeah, it looks great.
Thank you. It's a big challenge.
It's all right.
It's okay. It's all right. That's more like it.
Yeah, that's more like the Cliff we know.
But yeah, just chipping away at that, and then
we're getting a Kia, another issue of Kia. When's that? What's the plans on that?
Kia. Yeah. So Dave and I have got a sort of understanding that I need to get this. I want to get this Hellbreaker. It's a want and a need. I've got to get it done, and then we'll be back on Kia Wordsmith. But Dave has actually just sent me very recently the first 6 pages of Kia Wordsmith. So it all depends on how much I can get done, really. If I find myself in a bit of a little bit of a difficult moment with the Hellbreaker stuff, I might go and do a page of Kia to just move things around and then go back a bit. Sometimes I did that with the first issue of Space War. I was sort of going between both projects because at times you get stuck on a panel and you think, well, I'll go and do this other thing in the meantime. But I love both projects. I'm incredibly lucky to work with both Dave, who's now at Time Bomb Comics, and with Kia. Kia's been a real big project for me. I've enjoyed every part of that, and I'm very proud of that work. Yeah, and thank you.
It's beautiful. Every issue is leveled up.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, Ian, it's beautiful stuff.
That's it. It's just thank you. It's just trying to keep pushing yourself to get that little bit better, and that's what opens up opportunities for you. I mean, but yeah, just love it, and I love the opportunity for working on DUI. That was a really nice moment to be able to contribute to that, because I probably don't have the time to do the pages themselves. So I was delighted when I got asked to do the cover.
Well, it's not just you who's working on the issue. Your daughter's working on it as well, isn't she?
No, and that's a big proud dad moment for me. He was just being accepted for 2 pages. So there's going to be an Eva Ashcroft piece that I think she'll be 13 when it comes out, but she
brilliant. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, we've been friends for many years, but I've known your daughter. You've sort of brought her to shows and stuff and shown her bits of artwork, and man, she's so good now. Like, really.
Yes, she really is, and I keep on trying to get her into more comics. But I've yet to find the artist or the style that's really going to grab her. She likes Chris. Is it Chris Riddell who does the Neil Gaiman book sometimes? Yeah. She likes his work, so I'm sure there's something out there. And you've given her a few books, Tony, as well.
Yeah, when we were at Bridlington, she had
a I can remember when she was younger, we picked up Hilda, and she did enjoy that.
Yeah.
And then my youngest one enjoys that as well. And she drew me a comic strip the other day. She's only 7. She said, Dad, can you show this to your boss to see if you can get it in that comic? Meaning you're my... So I'll have to send you that over the WhatsApp.
Yeah, definitely.
But I've got the whole family and twisted all their arms to get them involved. They've all been good. Even Catherine.
I didn't realise it was going to be like the Ashcroft illustration empire.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning.
brutal corporate work environment that just involves sort of child labor and
Yeah. That's like about the fifth time you've accused me of that.
why? Well, I mean, if the glove fits, man.
Truth sticks. The speaking of DUI as well, man. I know you were Cliff. You were a slightly late addition to it, but
I was.
Your
sorry,
story
I came
is
in there.
fucking amazing, mate. I think.
Well, thank you.
We're lucky to have it in there. It's probably one of the most emotional things I think I've ever read. There's so much. Talk about knowing the creator from the creation. There's so much.
That was a very very personal piece. My mum has dementia. She's now in a home for it. So it was just very, very quick. And when you mentioned, I believe on Never Own Anything, was it you and Never Own Anything? I think you and Eamon were chatting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had some not anything that wasn't a story about robots.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that I thought I was too late for it. And I, of course, I'm not a great writer, so I wasn't paired up with anybody to do anything for it. But yeah, when you said you were hoping for something that was a little bit more personal
and shorter as well, like a nice one page. Yeah.
I pitched Eamon, and he very kindly said, "Yeah, go ahead." So I put together kind of a one pager that. Very quickly for me, I'm really super chuffed that you like it, because it really is very personal. 35 panels, and each one of them is just sort of talks about my mother's journey into dementia. So that was very personal.
I like it. 35 panels, is that on one page?
Yeah, it's like an A4 page, isn't it? But yeah, it reminds me of like an eerie story or a creepy story, but with an auto-bio edge to it almost,
Yeah, it's sort of disjointed, but also that's kind of intentional.
Yeah.
The idea was you could read sort of the panels independently of each other, so there's very little dialogue. So.
Shows the power of black and white comics as well, man. It really does.
I just put a little bit of color on it just to sort of distinguish
I get
different chunks of kind of stuff, and give the commonality to some of them. But I'm really glad Eamon said he loved it and accepted it for DUI. So we're all going to be in there. All three of us, T, right? You're in there too.
Yeah, I'm doing something with Helena Edwardson. We got it okayed a couple of weeks ago. She's about to start on it. She's done some of the sort of design work stuff. Yeah.
Any more naked ladies?
No. I'll talk to you about that off mic. I'm very pleased with that. Good. And so we've gone long, I knew we would, but where can we find you online, Ian?
Instagram, ianashcroft.art, and Patreon, ianashcroft.art as well. Cool. That was slick, wasn't it?
That was good.
I would like to note that I am a Patreon of Ian Ashcroft.
Me too.
And it's very worth the £1 or something. I think I paid to own his ass.
And what about you, Clifford?
You can find me at CG Cumber at most places, Twitter, Instagram, and occasionally on TikTok.
But you and TikTok makes me laugh.
I know, right? Just don't look me up on OnlyFans. That's only for the special clients.
Good. You can find me at Never Own Anything. Thanks for listening. If you do listen to this on the day release, you'll have about 24 hours to go and back Madeline, which is the story about comics memories, which Simon Russell, our buddy who's been on the show a number of times, has put together. Really lovely little book of short stories. Well worth it. So thanks, guys. And we might have a chat about doing another one on that. And now we've done our trilogy now, haven't we? So we're quite pleased. But good stuff.
Yeah, it's been great.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. See you soon.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.